Why is that relevant? What am I talking about? Hello. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Mary if you're new here, and for today's video, I'm going to be doing my mid-month wrap-up. I don't normally do this. I did, I think, the first month I had my channel, and then I kind of stopped doing it. But this month, I've already read 8 books, which is kind of a lot for me at this point. So I'm on track to read 16 books this month, which is the same number of books I read in October, which is like the most books I've read all year. So I don't know if I'll actually get to that point, but I did just want to do this wrap-up because right now these books are still kind of fresh in my mind, and I feel like when I wait till the end of the month to do my wrap-ups, the books that I read at the beginning of the month, I can't give them the review that I would like to because I don't remember as much about them. I'm not going to do stats or anything on them. I'll do that at the end of the month with my whole wrap-up, but if you want to hear how I felt about the 8 books that I read at the beginning of this month, just keep watching. The first book that I read in November was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwabb. This is... pretty sure everyone's heard about it. It's a new release this year, but it's basically a like historical / contemporary fantasy of a girl who in 17th century France, good God. In 17th century France, Addie LaRue makes a deal with a god that comes out at night, and he gives her eternal life. But the catch is that no one will ever remember her, and people pretty much forget everything about her as soon as she leaves a room. So she can't leave a mark on the world. I gave this book 4 stars. I was expecting that this would be a 5-star read, so I'm a little bummed that it wasn't. I do think I might reread it. It's the group read for the Reindeer Readathon. I'll have at least Eric's announcement video down below. That's a readathon coming up in December. And at this point, I've signed up to be in the group chat for it. And I think I'm gonna try to reread it. I don't know if I'll be able to get it from the library, but I might just buy it. I haven't decided. But I was disappointed in it because I thought it was gonna be a 5-star read, and my biggest qualm with it is that there's a dual perspective that I wasn't aware of going into it. And so Addie LaRue, no one can remember her, and then one day she's in New York City, she walks into a bookstore, and the guy who works at the bookstore named Henry, he remembers her. And it just sort of sets off this whole chain of events. Then you get some bits from Henry's point of view, and I didn't like Henry as a character. I don't know what about him exactly I didn't like, but I just wasn't that into him, and that hindered my ability to really enjoy the book, I think. I felt kind of meh about that, and that sort of put a damper on my ability to have like an emotional connection to the whole story. Because I've heard a lot of people say that they cry, and I cry pretty easily, and I didn't. It didn't like actually affect me or get to me at all. So I was disappointed in that, which is kind of weird to say, but I did kind of want to have an emotional reaction, and I didn't. So, oh, and I didn't mention The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue was a carryover from last month, so it was not on my November TBR. The second book that I finished in November is Off the Cliff by Becky Aikman. This is a nonfiction, so it was the first book I read for nonfiction November. Off the Cliff is basically about the making of the movie Thelma and Louise, and how many hurdles that movie had to jump to get made, because at the time that it was made, the movie industry didn't really make films about women where it wasn't like a sappy romance or like a teen sort of comedy. So there weren't a whole lot of like action films or films starring women who are in charge of their own destiny and where women are the main characters who are doing these things. And it was just interesting. It laid out a lot of like industry double standards where action films in the late 80s, early 90s were super popular. And so it wasn't a big deal if Arnold Schwarzenegger killed 60 people on screen. But in Thelma and Louise, the premise of Thelma and Louise, in case you haven't seen it, because I still haven't seen it. I was going to watch it after I read the book, but I haven't seen it yet. It follows 2 women who I think are just like old friends, and one of them has an abusive husband, and the other one has a long-term boyfriend who won't commit to her, and they go on a road trip and decide to like hang out, and their road trip goes awry because one of the girls gets like assaulted by a man, and the other girl kills the man, and then they're on the run from the law, and it goes from there. So at the time, people were like, no one's gonna want to watch this movie where these women kill somebody, because women aren't supposed to kill people. That's not a good role model. And it was just really interesting the way that the author was able to frame the arguments of the time using interviews from the time and interviews since with the director and the producers and the woman who wrote the script, and how she got turned down at like every like major, not station, because that's for TV, but like studio, I guess. It was just really interesting, and I really enjoyed learning about it. It was something that I don't really think about. And then what was especially interesting to me is at the end of the book, she talks about how like, and now the movie industry is different and better for women. And then she's like, just kidding, because a woman didn't win Best Director until Hurt Locker. Does anyone know? Hurt Locker was the first female win for Best Director. So that was a really interesting book, and I gave it 4 stars. I don't know if I mentioned that. It also was not on my TBR, but I listened to that as an audiobook because I have 2 books on my TBR this month for audiobooks. And I listen to audiobooks pretty much every day while I just do regular tasks, while I walk my dogs, etc. So I listen to like 1 to 2 hours of an audiobook, which is like 2 to 4 hours of that book every single day. So I didn't have anything because the audiobooks that I intended to listen to for November that were actually on my TBR were on hold until earlier this week. So that's why I have read a couple things that weren't on my TBR. That was one of them that I listened to as an audiobook. The third book that I read this month was A Little Life, which if you watched my October vlogs, I read this for like 2 or 3 weeks in October and couldn't get through it. And I'm not going to make this a whole rant. I thought about doing a whole rant review on this book, but I'm not going to. I have like a rant Goodreads review that I'll link down below, and I have a rant like Instagram tagged story if you would like to go watch that. But this basically follows 4 college best friends from when they're in their like mid-20s in New York City until like, it's like 30 or 40 years of their lives. And the first section of this book is so good. So like the first, I think it's divided into 5 or 6 parts, but the first part is amazing. The quality of writing is so good in this book. It's beautiful. The characters are so like fleshed out and real feeling. Like some of the best character work that I've ever seen done is done in this book, especially in the first section, in my opinion. The first section of this book follows these 4 friends, and it follows the 3 follows 3 of them specifically. JB, who is a young black artist. Willem, who is a young white, like, he's from somewhere in the country, like Montana or Wyoming or something, like some ranch house, and his parents are like European immigrants, and he had siblings, all of his siblings died pretty much when they were kids, and then he had one brother who died when he was an adult, and so his section deals a lot with like his grief of losing his family and how he feels like he doesn't have anybody anymore, which I really related to. And he's an actor in New York City. And then, what's the other guy's name? Malcolm. Sorry. The other guy's name is Malcolm, and he is an architect in New York City. And so the first part of the book follows all 3 of these men living their like semi-normal lives, trying to make it in their chosen career paths, and with reflections on their semi-normal childhood. But then the book turns and only follows Jude, who is, quite frankly, the most depressing character I've ever read. And I feel bad saying that because, like, the things that happen to Jude happen to people all the time. And people recover from trauma from that kind of thing all the time, and it's horrible. Jude is an orphan. He was raised in a monastery. He was severely, like, you know the whole book pretty much, that he was severely like sexually abused and just abused in different scenarios. You know that he lived in a group home for a while. You know that he lived in, there's like some hint of him having run away and living in a motel room for a while. And so you know vague things about him. You also know that at some point something happened with like a car accident or something, and he has like a really hard time using his legs from that, and like a lot of nerve damage. You know that he has chronic pain from that, and all this different, like, you know, all these different snippets of his trauma and these horrible things that happened to him. In the whole book, it's just little by little unraveling his life and explaining like how awful it is. And I think the biggest problem that I had with that, there's nothing happy in this book ever. So there's like 3 good things that happen, and you get them from the perspective of the person who is the most miserable in that time, which I hated. And also I read a Vulture article, I'll link it down below, of the author basically saying, I wanted to write the most miserable book that I could write and make people really upset. I just felt like this book was written as like trauma porn, and I'm not into it. Hello, it's Editing Mary. I didn't do a very good job explaining why I didn't like this book, but the gist of it is that I felt jaded after reading that Vulture interview and could no longer enjoy the book for what it was. I also didn't like that all of the abuse is on page. So you don't just like hear this happened to me. It's like on page, described in detail. Jude also, this is a minor spoiler maybe, but Jude also like self-harms, and that is on page and descriptive. Awful to read, and I don't recommend it for anybody. And also this book is like very anti-therapy, which I didn't like, because therapy is such like a positive and important thing to do if you have really any trauma. I think anyone ever could benefit from therapy, because regardless of whether you have like childhood trauma or anything like that, just being alive is really stressful. I think a lot of people have learned that right now in these times. So I think having the availability of a therapist is really important for anybody. Anyways, I just wanted to say all of that. I also wanted to mention my favorite thing about A Little Life, which was that Willem, the actor, is in movies. Obviously, he does plays in movies, but every time he's in a new production, the author would like give a fake plot to something that she made up, and I thought those sounded so interesting. So anyways, I really liked that part. But yeah, I don't recommend this book still. Those are other thoughts that I have on it. Okay, thanks. I'm gonna go back to editing personally, and I've already given it twice the time that I gave the other 2 or 3 books combined. So I didn't rate this. I can't rate it. I don't know what to say, but I would never recommend this to anybody. So I don't think you should read it. If you haven't read it, I don't think you should. And that's my like spiel. If you do read this, just make sure you know that there's a trigger warning. Anything you could possibly be triggered by is in this book. So not for me. The 4th book that I read was Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi. This I got as an ebook from my library. This filled the prompt to read a romance, I believe. And this is a new adult romance about, it's more like a new adult contemporary with a little splash of romance, to be honest with you, after having read it. I base the genres that I pick for my TBR game off of Goodreads shelves. And we all know that's not super accurate, but that's just the easiest way for me to organize it. I'm really bad at categorizing things as genres in general, so that really helps me. But just in case you ever see me talk about a book and you're like, that is absolutely not that genre, it's because it said it was on Goodreads. Emergency Contact follows 2 perspectives. One is Penny, one is Sam. Sam is a baristor? No, he's a male barista. I don't know if it's like baristo. I don't know if there's a different word for that. That's really weird. I just thought about that. But he works at the local coffee shop in Austin. Penny is a freshman at the University of Texas at Austin. She is Asian American, and so she deals with a little bit of like fetishization from her high school boyfriend. There's like a mention that he had yellow fever, the author's words, not mine. And she talks about that. And Sam is the other perspective, and he is basically homeless. He lives in the coffee shop that he works at, and he is the ex-step-uncle to Penny's freshman roommate, which sounds kind of convoluted, but basically Sam's mom had married Penny's roommate's grandfather at one point. Sam and Penny are kind of close to the same age, if that makes any sense. I don't know. That sounded really confusing when I said it, but that's pretty much the relationship, so that's why Penny meets Sam. And then basically the premise of the book is that after Penny meets Sam, she sees him having like a heat stroke or a panic attack or something, and she goes out to him and they swap phone numbers. And so she becomes his emergency contact, and then they just text, and basically they start like divulging all these secrets to each other about like Sam's having troubles with his ex-girlfriend, and Penny's having trouble with her writing class, and all this different stuff. They just talk to each other about everything, and it progresses from there. I give this book 3 stars. It sounds really cute, and it was pretty cute at parts. I found Penny to be almost insufferable at times. So obviously she feels like she doesn't fit in with her roommate and her roommate's friends, but she's like needlessly mean to them. And then she feels like her mom is really embarrassing because her mom is a really young mom, and she kind of dresses more like a teenager, and all the boys in Penny's class think that her mom is hot, and so that's uncomfortable for her. But again, all of that stuff happened before we met Penny. So when we meet Penny, she is about to go to college. She basically explains, everyone thinks my mom is hot, and that's embarrassing to me, and that's why I'm mean to her all the time. And on one hand, I understand what the author was trying to do with saying that there are like hard parental relationships, but it just didn't really work for me overall. And I didn't sympathize with Penny really at all. I kind of thought that she seemed very immature to me at times, especially when she would say things to her mom or like snub her friends that she like felt too good for. So while I did like the premise of the book, I didn't really like the characters. We'll leave it at that because I've already talked for too long in this video. Then I read Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory by Raphael Bob-Waksberg, who is the creator of BoJack Horseman. If you're familiar with that, this is a set of short stories. I read this as my like contemporary because it was shelved as that, but these are mostly like semi-contemporary, mostly like speculative and like slightly speculative and slightly absurd short stories. So there's one told from the perspective of a dog, and he talks about how his relationship with his man friend, I think is what he calls him, and then his man friend gets in a relationship with someone else, and so it's about the dog feeling like a little bit betrayed. So that one was really cute. I gave this 5 stars, I should say, I guess, before I get into all of the nitty gritty. I loved these. I thought the writing was very like quirky and witty. I also, y'all, I love absurdist short fiction. That's like one of my favorite genres, is like slightly speculative humor, absurdist. Even like shorter novels or novellas, like Cat's Cradle. I love Cat's Cradle. Anyways, this is just kind of like that. And so there's a group of superheroes who only have their magic powers if they get really drunk, which was just goofy and funny. But also this book handles a lot of topics like love and heartbreak and relationships. So the whole premise of this book is, in every story, it's talking about some kind of relationship and some kind of love. And whether that's new love blooming, or whether that's planning a wedding with someone and how stressful that can be, or realizing that, you know, you love your friends more, and like how you care about people. I just really loved it. I felt very emotionally connected to this book, even though the the like stories were so short. And I also thought it was very hilarious. So the 6th book that I read so far in November is The Cabin at the End of the World. I gave this 3 stars. This is a horror book by Paul Tremblay, and it basically follows a small family. It's husbands, Eric and Andrew, and their daughter, Wen, who they made a big deal about her being adopted from China, but I don't really know why. But she was adopted from China, and there you go. So the premise of this is that family goes to a cabin in, I think it's in Maine. I could be wrong. It's somewhere in New England. And it's on a lake, and it's in the middle of nowhere, and there's no cell service or anything. And then 4 strangers approach them, and they have like menacing looking weapons. And they basically tell them that that family is the only family that can prevent the end of the world. And then it goes on from there. I had pacing issues with this book. I felt like it kept building. The beginning of it built really good tension, and I thought I was going to really, really love it. And then something happens that breaks the tension. The tension was never able to quite climb back to where it had been from where it broke. So for that reason, it didn't really like hit me. Nothing in this book is really going to stick with me. I thought it was a creepy premise of like home invasion type of, it was like a home invasion spin on like an apocalyptic story. There's also no closure at the end of the book, which I don't really need there to be, I guess, but I just kind of, I wanted something more once it ended, and then it was just over. And sometimes in horror, I like a book just sort of ending and leaving you with that like empty, eerie feeling, but this didn't even leave me feeling with anything. So for that reason, I wouldn't really recommend it. It was fine. If that sounds really interesting to you, you might like it, but it's not really interesting to me, and I didn't like it. So there's that. And that was another audiobook that I listened to because I was waiting for the audiobooks that I had on hold. So it wasn't on my TBR. Then I finished The Winter's Crime, which is book 2 in the Winter's trilogy by Marie Rutkoski. This follows Kestrel, who is the daughter of a Valorian general, and she, in the beginning of the first book, buys a slave, Aaron, who is a Harani slave boy, and they kind of fall in love, and then Haran stages an uprising against the Valorians, and so the roles reverse, and that's sort of the beginning, the first book. And so neither of them really knows if they can trust each other, and she's a really good strategist because her dad is a general, and then, but this I really loved. I will say, I can't say too much about the second book, but in the second book, we again are following Kestrel and Aaron, and I was expecting a love triangle. There actually wasn't one, which was interesting, or at least not really. There wasn't anything fleshed out to be a love triangle. It did leave, again, on a giant cliffhanger, which I don't love. I gave this 4 stars as well as the first one 4 stars, but I did like this one less than the first one. But I feel like I can see where it's going. This did a lot more work in the sense of, like, the politics, like forming the politics of the world and showing sort of the big picture of what is actually going on, which I thought was really interesting and I was glad to see. But you don't get as much of Aaron and Kestrel. You actually really don't get any of Aaron and Kestrel, like, interacting. And I don't know. The first book had a couple of, like, near calls. But this is very YA fantasy in the sense that, like, if something does happen, it's going to be, like, 2 smooches in the last chapter of the last book. So we'll see. But I'm excited to keep going. And I'm also excited to know what's happening with the world now, which I think was missing from the book in the first book. In the first book, I didn't really care that much about, like, the world building. I didn't really understand what was happening. But now I'm really interested to see, because they gave you, like, an aerial of all the moving parts, and now I'm excited to see how it all fits together. And this was the prompt to read a fantasy romance. The 8th book that I read this month was This Will Be My Undoing by Morgan Jerkins. This is the second nonfiction that I read for Nonfiction November, and this was to fulfill the prompt of a Black author for my TBR. So this book is about Morgan Jerkins, who is I think she's like a writer and critic or something. I'm not familiar with her work, but from what I understand she is like a professional creative nonfiction writer. So she writes essays for magazines and like newspapers and such. I don't really know. But this was not really a memoir. This was mostly her essays reflecting on her life and her upbringing as a Black woman in America. And she discusses, like, internalized anti-Blackness and the effects of the beauty industry on her. I thought she had a lot of insightful things to say. I ended up giving this 3 stars. It wasn't organized in a way that made very much sense to me. So the essays, rather than being one essay on one topic or one essay on one, like, time in her life even, she would combine things that to me had no business being combined, I guess, or could have been separate essays. Like, she has an essay discussing her grief of her stepfather getting sick and passing away. And in that same essay, she has that, like, chunks about that interspersed with chunks about her trying to decide if she's going to get a labiaplasty, which, I don't know, it didn't work for me. Race and feminism is a very nuanced conversation and one that I really can't speak on because obviously I'm a white woman, so, and I understand that intersectionality in feminism is so, so important and that feminism has not traditionally been intersectional. It just hasn't, frankly. White women fought for the vote for white women. And Black women made the decision during suffrage. Black women decided to help Black men with the civil rights movement rather than white women with the suffrage movement, because either way, they were going to be looked at as second-class citizens, and they'd rather support something that would help perhaps their children, if they had boys, than something that would never really help them and that they would always be secondary to, which makes a lot of sense to me. So she didn't really talk about that in her essays or anything, but yeah, I just thought it was interesting. She also brought up a lot of things that I've never considered because I just have never had to. I thought this offered a really nuanced conversation on race, and I think if you are interested in learning a little bit more about intersectionality and feminism, there are some of these essays that I would just skim over were I to recommend it to somebody, but some of them I felt like were really powerful. She has an essay about Beyonce's Lemonade, which at first I was like, I don't know where this is going to go, but it ended up being really, really insightful into Black womanhood and how some people in the Black community felt like Beyonce doing that, felt like Lemonade was showing Beyonce's weakness and showing her as a victim. And Morgan Jerkins makes the argument, why can't Black women sometimes be not the victim, but why can't they be hurt? Why can't it show that they are strong, that they push through these things, like infidelity, I think, in particular for Lemonade. And just thought that was really, really interesting. But yeah, I would recommend that if that's something that you are interested in learning more about. And those are the 8 books that I've read so far in November. I'm also currently reading The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, and I'm listening to Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I finally received that audiobook from my library, and I also received the other audiobook that I'm going to listen to this month. So once I get through with Spinning Silver, I'll be able to move on to something else, which is really exciting. But yeah, if you want to see how I do with the rest of my TBR, make sure you subscribe to my channel, because I will put that video up at the very beginning of December with my final wrap up and thoughts on those books. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It would mean so, so much to me if you would subscribe down below. And comment down below if you've read any of these books and how you felt about them. If you agree, if you disagree, I would love to hear it. And that is going to be it for me today, but I will see you in my next video. Bye!